I was so afraid of like what happens when I, open the box and then everything comes out. I'm going to fall apart. And it's like, yeah, and then what?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Tales from the Journey podcast. I'm Stephanie Zamora, and today we are here with Michelle Ainhing, and she is a life coach who has really built up her career and her purpose work after the loss of her husband when she was younger. And suicide loss is something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's part of my story and journey as well. So I'm so honored and excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here too.
Yeah, I would love if you could start by sharing just a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm working, other than doing a lot of speaking around my story, I also am a certified coach, and I specialize in helping individuals and families living with mental health challenges, as well as those moving forward after loss.
Yeah, such important work. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about how you and your family faced that stigma of mental health issues and suicide loss. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, because mental health is something that we all face and deal with. I would love to go back and start. So you lost your husband when you were 34.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about who you were and what your life was like before that.
Well, my husband and I knew each other growing up. We first met when we were 8. And so, and kind of kept in touch over the years, started dating when we were 18, got married at 22, the high school sweethearts, young and innocent. I grew up in what I could say in nice terms was a very constrictive home, a lot of rules, a lot of control, a lot of shaming. So that was, kind of the space that I was in. I was quite shame driven myself, and then as we'll talk more about the story, but when, talk about mental health and suicide and stigma and all that, it was like, I was already living in that space anyways. So that definitely formed a part of my story. And, we had 2 kids, and it all seemed okay until it didn't.
Yeah, and paint us a little more of a picture. I mean, from your perspective before your loss, if you're able to access that, I know sometimes it's hard to access the before. What did everything seem okay on the surface? Did he seem happy? Were you guys happy? What was life like?
Yeah, we were happy. He was my best friend, but I wasn't particularly, healthy because I was talking about the shame. Right. He had his own stuff. But it's interesting because the community we grew up in, nobody talked about mental health. Nobody, and it was also like we were both born in the early 70s. So like that wasn't on people's radar at the time either. And so there were definitely signs. Like I had my stuff, he was adopted, and he was adopted when he was almost a year old, was in a foster home before that. So there were some things, in biologically on his side, that didn't set him up for the greatest success, although he was adopted into a wonderful family who did their best. But when the signs of his mental illness started showing up, we didn't know that, that might have been a sign. Like, I remember him sharing with me once about, that he remembered being 6 years old and walking around the playground thinking life was hard. And, like clearly that's a sign of depression. 6-year-old kids generally don't think that. But like, if you don't know what depression is, you're not like, how are you doing now? So it's only, of course, looking back that it's like, there were signs there. And then, so he eventually was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and a type of schizophrenia. I think it's schizoaffective disorder. But even like, the signs that were kind of there that started showing up were after my first son was born. But again, it was like bizarre, unusual things that happened. And it was like, what's that all about? And he was just kind of like, I don't know. And just kind of got defensive. And I'm like, what's that? But they were so few and far between that it wasn't like we were able to paint a picture until way later. Then it was like, okay, that explains it. Now I can see it. But again, it was really, from the time that we got the diagnosis till we lost him was only about 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so it's really like I was piecing things together for a long time after his death, of like, oh, okay, that explains this and that explains that, and having to kind of put it all together for myself.
Yeah, definitely. Oh gosh, it's such a hard thing to experience. So you were 34 years old, and how old were your kids?
7 and 4.
Yeah. I would love if you could share as much or as little as you want about the loss and that experience and
Mm.
what it kind of did to you in your life in that moment.
Yeah, sure. So from the time he got diagnosed, like I mentioned, it was pretty short. It was pretty, he declined very quickly. He was under medical care. They were trying the different medications, but generally, there's a cocktail, and it has to be the right mix and the right
Yeah.
doses. And they hadn't quite figured it out. And unfortunately, he lost hope. But he never talked about wanting to die. Like they say, there are certain signs to look out for. He hid it all. Like, he was not working. Like he was sick enough that often he was in bed for days at a time. So the depression was very evident, but he did a good job of covering up what was happening when he was manic. Like he just wouldn't be home. And so, with my kids, it was just, oh, daddy's working so hard, so he's not home. And then when he'd be home, it was like, oh, daddy's so tired from
Yeah.
working so hard. So now he sleeps a lot. And, so they, kids sense things, but again, they didn't know what they were sensing. But, it was just, we were trying to cover everything up. We didn't tell people that he wasn't working. So it was a lot of, hiding a lot of things. And,
Yeah.
so it came as a complete shock when he passed away. And he had called me just before he died. He had gone actually to New York. We live in Canada, and he went to New York to complete the suicide, and called me and just said, my brain's getting bad. It's not, well, it's bad. It's not getting any better. And I have to go away. And me and my brilliance was like, well, your brain's going to follow you wherever you go, not even cluing into what he was saying. He was like,
Yeah.
no, I'm going away. And he's like, I left messages for you and my parents and the kids at home. And that's when it clicked in, and then he hung up on me. And
Mm.
so, yeah, it was, I called the police. Somehow they were able to track the cell phones and, found him quite quickly, but sadly it was already too late at that point. And I had to unfortunately go and tell his parents. And, as, we were at their place, and, calling the immediate family, the closest friends, and telling them what happened. And, as everybody was gathering, somebody turned to me and was like, what are we going to tell people?
Mm.
And, we came from this community, like I mentioned, that just didn't talk about it. There were so many cover-ups. And, of course, me in my shameful place of just like, oh yeah, what are we going to tell people? I don't want people knowing. First of all, they don't know about, that he had the mental illness and that he wasn't working. Maybe there's something that I didn't do. Did I love him
Mm.
enough? Did I manage
Yeah.
his medication right? Did I somehow screw up? Better to
A lot
cover it
of guilt
up.
comes up.
Yeah. So they suggested, why don't we say it was an accident? It was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And so we just went forward with that story. And
Yeah. I can only imagine. What was that experience like for you, both before he passed and after, of having this very challenging and difficult experience and not being able to talk about it or share it with people?
yeah, it was really, I mean, to say it was hard is an understatement. I from the beginning, I wasn't able to grieve the way that I needed to grieve. Grieving the suicide
Yeah.
looks very different than grieving an accident. There are a lot of other emotions. And you know there were things like, in the couple of weeks after he passed away, I was getting calls from creditors because he had spent a lot of money and, opened up credit cards, and I'm like dealing with these things, and, feeling a lot of anger around, like, why, I felt abandoned. And it was like, okay, you're gone, and now I have to raise our kids alone. I have to somehow explain it to them at some point, because I told them also it was an accident, because I was
Yeah.
like, if I can't wrap my head around this, how can I expect these tiny people to understand? And I didn't want them bearing the guilt and thinking, because kids do that, they internalize and think
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe I could have done something different and he'd be here. And so I internalized all of it, just had that much more shame. It impacted my mental health. When we shove all the emotions down, it creates depression. And I already had depression undiagnosed then, but it just made it that much worse. I was so much more isolated because I couldn't talk about it. And,
Yeah.
I didn't want people knowing what I had been through, like the side of mania is not pretty.
Yeah.
And, you know, I didn't want to go there, because it was like that wasn't him. Like I see, like, there was the man that I married, and then there was the man who we lost, but they were not the same person. And I didn't want to share what my experiences were. So it was very much hiding it all, and just always being anxious that somebody might find out the truth.
Yeah. Oh, my heart breaks for you and your kids. I know in my suicide loss, the anger was the thing that surprised me most. And I had done enough personal growth work and I knew enough about like the stages of grief to know that it was supposed to be there, but it was so fierce and it was so hard to allow it because it felt wrong.
Yeah.
Like he was in enough pain that he chose to leave. And here I am pissed off at him for doing it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And ultimately for me, the anger was at the core, the unexpressed anger, the things I didn't feel like I could say were at the core of my PTSD, which was bad for the first year and took a while to come back from. But what ways did your repressed emotions start showing up for you?
Um, for me, my depression shows up in the sense that rather than going into the dark places, I literally shut down. I'm generally a very, I'm quite empathic. I'm very feeling. I'm very emotions based, and I don't feel anything. So that's really what happened. Like I stopped myself from feeling, but halting that, the healing process, and feeling it out and grieving, it just it ended up leaking out sideways everywhere and at the
Yeah.
most inappropriate times. And but it for me, it was just I turned it off, and I just told myself, just one foot in front of the other, life goes on, you need to show up for these kids. You can't, I didn't let myself, like, I remember thinking, even at times where I had friends that were like, you need to work through this. Like, even though I had done some therapy and my therapist knew, I was so unhealthy. And I was just like, listen, I'm supporting these kids and I have to show up for them every day. I can't afford to
Yeah.
start like letting my guard. I was so afraid of like what happens when I, open the box and then everything
Yes.
comes out. I'm going to fall apart. And it's like, yeah, and then what? Like, are you going to support me when I can't work? And and so
Yeah.
I really just I shoved it all down. I took everything in my life of just like, just be grateful for what you have. And, which is not real gratitude. It's telling yourself to do that. And so I settled for a lot.
Yeah.
And I lived a life that was really not for me. I had careers that were not where I was supposed to be. But again, it was like, well, your job is secure. You're a single mom. Be happy you're here. And who are you to dream? And relationships, being as unhealthy as I was not attracting healthy people. So it was just
Yeah.
one person after the next. It was like, same story, different guy, essentially.
Yeah.
And so it was just a very toxic way of living.
Yeah. What was the turning point for you? Was there a moment? I know sometimes we have more than one kind of rock bottom moment, turning point moment, but what was yours and was there more than one?
Yeah, I love that, because I always say, like, I didn't hit the rock bottom. It's like I hit it and then I bounced and
Yeah.
bounced and bounced and bounced. And so yeah, there were a bunch of them. But the real catalyst for me was it was around my 45th birthday. And, we all kind of go through that, they call it a midlife crisis, awakening, whatever you want to call it. But it was around that time I was in a very, very unhealthy relationship. Also, working in a job where I just was not happy. I was working in finance, punching numbers behind a computer all day, feeling pressured that when I leave at 5 because I have to go home and feed my kids because there's nobody else, everyone's looking at you like, well, we all stay till 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever we're doing. It's like, yeah, I can't. But, it was just, all of it was so out of alignment with who I was. And this relationship in particular, something had happened and it kind of woke me up to, oh my gosh, this is so unhealthy. I've been in this situation before. And it actually, this particular relationship was very much like my childhood environment. So yeah, it's really unhealthy, manipulation, gaslighting, a lot of blaming and shaming me of just, well, you came from a messed up family and, this is what happened to you. So everything in our relationship is your fault. And it was like, and I kept saying no, it takes 2 to tango. I can't do it on my own, but it's like, no, it's you. I'm just reacting. And so, yeah, it was just one more argument like that was particularly bad. And I just, had this moment of oh my God, I am the common denominator in everything that's wrong in my life. And, that aha moment was totally devastating. And at the same time, completely liberating, because I knew okay, if it's me, I can change me.
Oh, I got goosebumps when you said that. It is this devastating is the perfect, you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So what did you do with that information?
Oh, well, yeah, at that point, having that realization, and again, it was partly because of my 45th birthday of just okay, my first 45 years have been so painful.
Yeah.
I can't live the next half of my life like this. And when I realized okay, it's in me to change and all of these variables will change, it was okay, I need to do yet another deep dive into therapy. But this time it was no, I'm going deeper than I ever did before. It was I've got to work through my childhood stuff. I have to work through my shame, because I knew that healing that was going to help me heal the shame around, my husband's death and the suicide and the stigma and all of that. So did a really deep dive, very intense work, working through my own PTSD, through EMDR, which you are probably familiar with.
Yeah.
It's trauma therapy. So I was doing, the inner child work as talk therapy, then, later in the week doing EMDR. And then I also was doing somatic work, a form called Rolfing, releasing trauma from your fascia. So these 3 practitioners I would see every week, and things that would come up with one, I'd take to the next and the next. And I tell people I don't recommend that for everyone, but I was just I'm done. Yeah. I am done and I'm not living this way anymore. And around the same time, a close friend of mine had also, she had become a coach. And it's funny because I didn't know what coaching was at the time. And she kept saying, oh, you're going to love it. It's totally for you. And I was like, what is it? She's just try the course. It's a weekend, you'll learn some great tools that you can use anywhere, but I think you're going to love. And I was like, fine, just to get you off my back, I'll take this course. And so I went in that weekend. Of course, I was a deer caught in headlights of oh my God, there are people here that are healthy, that are using all these amazing words you can, your feelings are welcome. And what's the true you? And it's what? Yeah, so once the shock wore off, then the tears started flowing. And that was so healing for me to find this new community of people that were so accepting of oh, you went through, we all went through crap in our lives, different extents. And that makes us beautiful. And that's part of who we are. And it was whoa, I've only been judged. I only know judgment around that. And so while doing the healing work and at the same time moving forward through my coaches training, meeting more and more people who thought the same way that I was now, like, yay, I'm free to feel this way and think this way. Like, I'm not wrong for it.
Yeah.
Really helped me with my healing.
Yeah. Wow. I would love if you could share a little bit more about whatever comes up for you with this question. But when we tell these stories, I feel like it's very easy, and it's not intentional, but it's very easy for us to kind of gloss through the work. Like,
Mm,
you were going to different practitioners and stuff was coming up, but it's like, I would love if you could share more of what that experience was like, because
sure.
it can be incredibly difficult. And I feel like when we don't understand that it's supposed to be, we start to think, well, something's wrong with me because I can't just like go to therapy and get better.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was it like to really start unpacking all of that stuff?
It was hard. I won't lie. It was hard, and it was also not as hard as living the toxic life I was living.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of hard. But this was something like, okay, I'm going to heal from this. But I do remember at one point saying to my therapist, will I ever stop crying? Because I felt like I will never. So she was like, no, you will. One day you won't be crying the same way. And so there was a lot of releasing for me.
Yeah.
I remember when I decided to go back and do this deep dive, I told my kids, like, listen, there's stuff I need to work through from like and they knew, like, I've been estranged from my family for 25 years now. So they knew there's a lot of unhealthy stuff that I grew up with. And I said, I need to grieve the childhood I didn't have. I need to grieve the estrangement. I need to grieve, losing your dad. There's a lot that I never
Yeah.
processed. And it's going to look tough and you're going to see me crying a lot. I'm okay. But this is how it's going to be. And it was honestly 8 months of me crying all day,
Yeah.
every day. And I went to work and it was just like, okay, finish crying in the car, go
Yeah.
to work, sit at my desk, like, oh, I'm feeling the tears rising, running to the bathroom, bawling my eyes out, touching up my
Yes.
makeup, going back in and keep going until the next burst. And then I go home and it was like collapse in bed, guys, order pizza. My older son at that point had just gotten his driver's license. I was like, go get, hamburgers, pizza, whatever you want. I can't cook. And it was really 8 months of just unpacking and
Yeah.
crying. And, there's still, like, I'm still working through so much. Like, the more I heal and the more I show up in the work that I'm doing, things still shift. Like, moving, once I was able to move out of the anger, or a great deal, I can't say 100%, but, even if it was 75%, then it was now I'm grieving from the place of like losing my best friend. And so then there was a whole new way of crying.
Yes.
So yeah, so it was not pretty, but at all.
No.
I should have bought stocks in Kleenex, but and I laugh about it now. But no, it was difficult, but it was also the greatest gift I ever gave myself.
Yeah. I laugh about it too, because when I move big stuff, I'm just weepy for days and weeks
Yeah,
on end. I tell my clients this all the time, like, it's okay. You don't even have to know where it's coming from specifically. Like,
yeah,
it's just old stuff moving, and that's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. One of my therapists had used the metaphor. It's like a pot of boiling water. It's like, the steam comes up and it rises and then you kind of blow it away, but then new
Yeah.
stuff comes up and you blow. And that's really
That's
what
perfect.
the healing is like. It's just, you keep moving that away and it's like, oh, look, there's a bit more, and
Yeah.
something new. And, because I was also grieving for my children, and so I felt like I was really grieving for three of just, what
Yeah.
they didn't get to experience, with him. They didn't know, like, when they lost him, like being 7 and 4, my 7-year-old, his first thing was like, can you get us a new dad? He
Oh,
didn't even know what to feel,
yeah.
and he shed one tear, and we were at my brother's place, and he was just like, can I go play with my cousins again? I was like, go. Like, he
Yeah.
didn't know what to do with it. And then my younger one was 4, and at 4 you don't have a concept of death. So he didn't understand. He was relating it to like seeing Scooby-Doo and like the mummies that are all wrapped in toilet paper and walking around the streets like that. And he's like, oh,
Yeah.
is daddy a mummy?
Wow.
And it was like, no. And it was only a year after, like after enough time had passed, he one day he just said to me, like, daddy's not coming back, is he? And that's where it kind of sank in. It was like, no, he's not. And, but all of the school performances, all of the birthday parties, the graduations, they're both in university now, but all of those, it's like feeling like, oh, he missed it. And I'm going to tear up because I don't think
Yeah.
I will ever get over that. It's, every important moment is, just, I feel the loss again. I think we all go
Yep.
through that of just like, we can say, oh, they're here in spirit, but it's not the same.
Yeah, you're so right. What was it like for you? What I think is incredible about your story and your journey, and I think is so helpful to other people, is what was it like to finally start telling the truth about his
Mm.
death and the loss? I know there's a lot of different things we go through, whether it's a suicide loss or trauma or abuse, that we're not able to even make sense of it for ourselves, let alone make words about it to other people. And I know for me, when it came to like sexual trauma, being able to finally start talking about it years later was so scary because it was never part of what I had shared with anyone before. And so, yeah, what was that like for you?
Yeah. So I will preface this by saying I had tons of support, in getting ready to
Yeah.
talk about it. For me, the first step was telling my kids, and I always knew at some point I'm going to tell them, but I always thought, okay, I'll wait till they're parents, and then they'll understand why I made this choice, and it'll be okay. And then it just it got to a point where it was quite apparent that it was time, and it was like, okay, yeah, it's now. And so I had a group of very close dear friends who really helped me, help build me up and help me be very intentional in how I told my kids. And that's the nice thing about being a coach. You have so many coach friends, so it's like everybody's
Yes.
coaching me through like, okay, how do you want to show up, what are the words you want to use? So I got really, really clear on it. But it was still terrifying because while I was clear on how I was showing up, I had no clue how they were going to react.
Yeah.
And so, I was terrified because I knew there was a good chance they might be really angry at me. They may never want to talk to me. And, I had a few friends who knew the truth all along, and, being well-wishers and, trying to be helpful, they were like, you should tell your kids, because I heard of this person, I met this person who found out something later on in life and they felt like their whole life was a lie, or this one didn't see, I was like, thanks. That's great. What do I do with that? So yeah, so I had all of that in the back of my mind and was really terrified. But the truth is, like, I got to the point where I just, called them up for dinner one day. And it's funny because like I even had picked like, okay, it was going to be this day.
Yeah.
I decided like 2 months earlier, was gearing myself up. And then a few days before, I messaged this group of friends that were helping with it. I was like, you know what, I'm doing it today. I can't wait. And so, yeah, I called them up for dinner. I sat them down at the table and just said, before we eat, I need to tell you something. And I just said, like, I wish I had done it differently, but we didn't. And this is the truth about how your dad died. And, all of my fears were completely wrong. I always say, like, fear is a liar. It can take you to the worst places. But it was the complete, I could not have asked for a better outcome and a better experience. We sat around the table, they were each these are two teenage boys and they're both holding my hand. And, just, it was beautiful. They both said they had a feeling that he didn't die in an accident, but they didn't think it was suicide. But my younger one said he realized that he didn't know any details about it. My older one said, he had a sense, but, never really wanted to ask. And so I just said, look, I don't, like, no more lies, no more secrets from this point on, ask me anything you want to know. And they needed time to process it. Like, my older son didn't want to know how it happened. My younger one did. And my older one was like, that's fine. You can tell him I'm going to leave the room. And, and I just said, okay, we're going to be completely open from this point. And then, after my older one processed it a bit more, then he was like, okay, now you can tell me more.
Yeah.
And so it was really just allowing for their, letting, and that was the thing. I had set the intention that this is about them. It's not about me. I'm not looking for pity. It wasn't about like, oh, poor me, like I didn't know, but I was like, no, this is about you. Like, I wish I had done it differently, and I'm owning that. And so it went well. And then I realized after, like, at this point, I had already started coaching, and it was funny because I was kind of like, I want to empower women and I want people to live in their truth. And, even though I wasn't, and I was kind of dancing around what it was, and then came to the realization that, what, this is how I need to help people, because I have this story and I've been through this. For people who are going through their own mental health challenges, who maybe are feeling shame around it, or if it's a suicide, whatever it is, I know I've lived it, and I can serve from this place, because, so many of us feel like we need to be healed before we can serve. And the truth is, as long as you're one step ahead of anybody else, you can give guidance, and we can all hold space and just be there and show up for people. And so, so at this point, I said to my kids, because like now we're a team, and it's like, okay, this is what I think I need to do in the world. And they were like, go for it, Mom. And so I realized the best way and the easiest way to now get the word out to everybody that my husband and I had grown up with all the way to today, to let everyone know at the same time as well, post it on Facebook. And so I did. And it took me about 3 weeks to compose the post. And my older son, who's a great writer, did some editing on it, and my kids were like, you got this, Mom, post it. I'm like, not yet, I'm not ready, I need more time. They're like, just do it, just hit the button. So they were great. And and again, like, the fear was there of like, oh my God, people are going to judge me, they're going to call me a liar, they're going to say all these things about me. And again, not true. I posted it, and I posted it first thing in the morning, and I literally spent the day crying, because I just was bombarded by so many messages and calls and, posts, just like supporting me and loving on me, that I sat. So I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this love was possible, because I was so harshly judging myself. And it was like, no, people get it. And I thought like, oh, I'll hear something from, not one peep from anybody about anything negative. Everyone was so amazing and supportive. And so it was like, all right, well, throw that old story out the window. And I never looked back. And it's just, from that point on, and by at this point, I mean, well, already a number of months before that, I had left the job that I wasn't happy in. The boyfriend was gone way earlier. And it was like, okay, now I'm living the life that I was supposed to be living, and feeling so fulfilled, just knowing that this is the work that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a lot of fear. I published my memoir at the beginning of 2020, and there was some things that I was like, people are going to judge me for what I thought or what I said or the ways that I handled things. And the truth is, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I would love to hear your perspective. I couldn't have done it any other way. Like, I could only do what I could do in those moments with where I was at and what I was feeling and what I was dealing with.
Yeah, 100%. That's like, we only have the certain tools. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because in that post where I talked about like, this is what happened and this is what I want to do, I quoted Maya Angelou. She says, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. And that's how I live my life, of just like, we're human. It's so messy. And, and we spend so much, well, not everyone, but many of us spend a lot of time fighting that and trying to be perfect. And it's like, you're never going to, there is no such thing as perfect. Nobody in the history of humankind has done it perfectly. And so just drop that expectation completely, just let it be messy, and forgive yourself. And, that's forever a work in progress. But I know for me, that was the most healing thing for me, of going from this place of self-loathing, first into self-neutrality, because I say, like, when you don't know what love even looks like, you can't go to self-love. It's like, when they say, like, look in the mirror and say, I love you. It's like, I'm not doing that. And I couldn't, and it felt so fake. And it was just really going just to neutral, where I was noticing, my own self-talk and what I was saying to myself. And it was like, okay, just when I noticed that I'm just completely abusing myself, just stop it right there and say, like, no, I don't have to be like this. And then gradually I started catching it more and more, and then it started happening less and less. And then, when it was happening less and less, it was like, wow, look at me. And, now I say I'm the queen of self-care, because it's really, it's been so much about that. I mean, we all have that inner critic that's going to show up. And, I've just started writing my memoir as well. And so that inner critic is like, it's just like, you can't say that. And it's like, well, I'm gonna. So yeah, it's really knowing, though, that when I'm showing up, when I'm speaking, and I'm sure you feel the same way with your memoir, it's like, people need to hear this. There are people who are still where we were back then, that really need to know it's possible to heal, and it's possible to be free of all the shame and the crap, and you can live a happy life.
And that it's supposed to be hard and messy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited for your memoir.
Thank you.
I want to talk more about your work, but first I would love to know what your relationship is and was to things like trust and faith, whether it's religious or spiritual or otherwise. What did those things mean to you as you were going through all this, and what do they mean to you now?
So that's a great question. I grew up in a very religious family, but it was more the God that slays and is unforgiving.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of judgment around that, and a lot of very strong feelings. I felt a lot of unfairness. I was very, very angry at God, of just like, it's one thing what if this is punishing me, but how could you do this to my children? They were innocent, they're babies. Like, this doesn't make sense. And I tried reading, like I was, listening to spiritual leaders, going to classes, reading books, and I remember at one point, there's a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And I remember reading it, and I got to the part where he was just saying, like, a lot of this is just random, like statistically, X number of people are going to die of this way. And I was just like, no, I don't accept. And I literally just, part of the anger coming out, I whipped it against the wall, and I was like, I'm not reading this book. This is crap. So, so I had a lot of struggles with that. And I realized too, that a lot of the way that I was brought up was to look outside of yourself for the answers. And so I didn't trust my intuition. I was a victim of gaslighting growing up. So it was just like, no, what you think is wrong. Like, that didn't happen, and you can't trust your instinct. And I'd feel it, and I'd be like, no, I know this is the truth. And it was like, no, it's not. So I didn't. And then it was like, oh, but God knows. So everything was outside of me. So my particular journey in healing was learning to trust myself, and realizing that the experiences I had in childhood actually gifted me with a higher sense of intuition than many other people have, because I grew up in a home that didn't feel safe. And so I was always on hyper alert of like, okay, how are my parents doing? Are they upset? Are they angry? Just that hyper vigilance. And so I realized, like, oh, my intuition is so fine-tuned because I've been practicing this. And so it just became really about listening to myself.
Yeah.
And, my relationship with God is still interesting. I grew up with religious practices. I taught them to my children. I like some of the traditional aspects of things, but really for me, I'm now at a place where I'm looking to like, okay, what feels right for me,
Yeah.
and trusting, and for me, it's not so much about the God that I grew up with. It's, I just say the universe, that it's trusting that, okay, yes, there is a higher power, and sometimes I need to lean back and just surrender and let things happen, and letting go of that need to hold tight and try and control, because we can't. And it makes it, we make our lives so much harder when we try to do that. So it's shifted. So yes, there is a faith, but it's just, I don't even have a name for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I really relate to that as well. So you've shared like little bits of your journey to coming into your purpose work and what you're doing now, but what did it look like and what was the process for you to really step into it?
Ah, yeah, I mean, well, I talked about the healing, and it was lots of surrender. And for me, it was about just showing up every day, knowing that, you know, if I'm doing a post, if it's a video, if it's a podcast, I trust that there's somebody out there who needs to hear whatever I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so that's what keeps me going, because I mean, I'm still dealing with my mental health challenges. The depression is still there. I have good days, I have bad days. The pandemic has not been fun. And,
Yep.
and I have to remind myself that I've made a commitment, to doing this work. And it's that commitment that really keeps me going every single day and saying, just show up. And I'm just looking over at my desk, but I have a little sign, that says, just show up. And that's what I remind myself, that it doesn't have to look perfect. I don't have to speak whatever it is. The message doesn't have to be perfect. As long as I'm showing up, someone is hearing it, and it's helping somebody, and I feel good about it. And then, always getting the feedback, doing a podcast interview and having somebody say, oh my gosh, what you were talking about touched me so deeply. It's like, I cry
Yeah.
every single time
I
I get a
know.
message like that. It's just so, and then it's like, that motivates me to keep going, because I know what I needed back then. And I needed to know that there is hope, and that I was going to be okay, and that there are people out there, even if I didn't know who they were yet, but I knew that if I just keep looking, like, there are people and I can reach out to them, and there's so many people that want to help. And so it's
Yeah.
just, it's just finding them and connecting.
Yeah. So how did you start getting, where did you start getting clients? How did you start
Mm.
doing actual coaching work?
Yeah. So that Facebook post where I posted my vulnerability, got me a couple of clients right off the bat.
Awesome.
It was pretty wild. And most of the work that I did was really through Facebook, and Instagram, of just showing up and talking about my experiences.
Yeah.
I did, for a period of time, and I was working with a business coach. Well, I've worked with a few different business coaches, and so one coach challenged me, do a once a week a Facebook video, and it was like, oh my god, I can't do that. like I can write something, I can post a meme, but I
Yeah.
can't. And he was like, no, do it. And he's like, knowing the recovering perfectionist in me, he's like, you can't do a million takes either. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you're killing me here. But it was great. So I started doing, it was funny. I started doing Monday morning mental health moments with Michelle. And the
Mm.
funny thing was that I decided, okay, I'm going to do it on this Monday morning. And then I totally chickened out, didn't do it. And then I had to go back to my coach that week and say, like, okay, I have no excuse at all, but I
Yeah.
didn't do it. And then the next week, the Monday came and I didn't do it again. I'm like, oh my God, I can't go back to him again and tell him I didn't do it. So I was like, okay, you know what? Like Tuesday came, and it was lunchtime, and I was like, I'm just doing it now. And I put it out there and I was like, you know what? And I totally winged it. I was like, let's talk about perfectionism. Like, it's exhausting. It's so hard. You know, this was supposed to be Monday morning. It's Tuesday afternoon. You know what? I'm not, and like, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. And then it actually became a thing where it would just happen on random days of the week. And I kept it as Monday morning mental health moments. And people thought it was hilarious because they were just like, well, you know, it's Thursday night or it's Wednesday morning, but I'm still calling it that. And there were a few people that like would comment on my posts and be like, maybe you should change the name. And I'm like, why? I like the way it sounds. Like, why are you being such a stickler about it? Like, have some fun. And so that gave me, you know, it took a lot of courage to do, but, you know, each step of showing up a little bit more, just, you know, kept it going, and people would share things, and that's really how I've been building the business. Like, I've been very fortunate that I've done very little paid advertising, and you know, the people find me, but it's I keep showing up. And you know, I think that because I am so vulnerable about my experience, you know, people hear me, they witness me, and they're just like, okay, she's not going to judge me. And I've been told that many times, that, you know, they're like, I feel like I could tell you anything and you're going to accept. And I'm like, you know, I'm owning all my crap. So yeah, bring it on. Like, it's not going to surprise me. And no, like, this is like, this is part of being human. Like, we can't judge others. We can't judge ourselves. Like, this is the experience, guys.
Yeah. So to feel like you're behind every person doing Facebook Lives is that exact story of like weeks of resistance. So that cracks me up. Because I do the same thing. I even put it on my calendar and I'm like, no.
Right. It's like, you got to have the whole like inner coaching and the conversations with yourself, and you can do it. You've got this. And then it's like, and then you do it and you're like, I don't like how that looked. And it's like, do not delete, just post it. It's like, okay, fine. Yeah. And then people love it. And you're like, oh, you know?
Yeah. One thing I love about your message and your mission and the things that you've shared, and it's so funny, we have all these intake questions because we're really trying to get a particular type of story, and they're all very different stories, but we want people, like it says on the application, that are not in the middle of it. And so I've had to rephrase the question a few times, but we try to get at like, do you feel like you're through it, even though we know you're still growing and healing? And so what I love is that you really own that aspect, that you're still working on your mental health. Like, yes, you're through the deep, dark, hard parts. And yet, as all of us know, the healing and the growth work is never done.
Oh no.
And it just like creeps up out of nowhere sometimes. And especially as we push our edges and we do new things, even like starting a business and doing a Facebook Live, like all of our trauma stuff will come up. All of our like edges need to be pushed. And so what are some things that you still do to really work on and support your own mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, and yeah, I'm re-experiencing it in a new way, working on my memoir. Like a couple of weeks ago, I had just converted my wedding video to digital. And so my best friend came over and we watched it together, and oh my God, it was like super triggering. And, you know, just first of all, so, you know, to answer your question, support. We are not meant to do this alone. Please don't think that you can do this alone. So really having a support network. And I often say to people, you know, if the people around you are in the same space that you were in when you were not healthy, find new people. And we are so blessed to live in an age, like, as much as we complain about social media, it is such a gift, in the sense that there are so many groups out there. There's so many, you know, and in the pandemic too, like, everybody's moved to virtual. So you can find any kind of group you need anywhere in the world at any time of day. And we have access to it, because when my husband passed away, Facebook hadn't come out yet. Like, it was like literally just a few months later. So I didn't know where to look, but now I'm part of a lot of different healing groups and mental health groups, and just like a lot of them I'm on, I just stalk. I'm just like reading people's posts, but it amazes me how somebody will post something vulnerable and just say like, I'm going through a hard time, and complete strangers who are in that group, like you will get like 25, 30 people at least commenting saying, I'm here for you, please private message me, like don't feel, I'm here to talk to you. And so finally, because the truth is it's through these people that we make these connections. I mean, I've done a number of podcasts and I've met phenomenal people that it's just like, okay, I'm adding you to my group, like, you're one of mine now. And they're like, happily, and just knowing that, like, just so make sure that, to build that support. So that was the key for me. Forgiveness and giving myself the space and the time. So, talking about my wedding video where, I shut down, I did go, into some depression because I wasn't feeling, and that was my sign. It's like, I'm not crying and I know I should be crying. And my friend was like, oh, go watch this episode of this show. It's going to have you crying. And I watched and I'm like, oh my God, I'm feeling nothing. And then telling her, okay, I'm not feeling anything, and just giving myself the space of like, okay, I'm going to clear my calendar and just let myself be with whatever I'm with. And so that kind of space, mindfulness has been the greatest gift for me. Just having that pause of just, checking in with myself of like, oh, what am I feeling? What am I noticing? Where's the tightness? Not even, it doesn't even have to be, I do meditate, but my mindful practices go so much more beyond the meditation. And, I teach people, like, you don't have to sit and be like, to get anywhere, just taking a break and, noticing how you're breathing, or even just slowing your own breathing down is going to do wonders. Checking in with myself of just like, oh, I noticed that I'm having some butterflies, and getting curious and saying, okay, what's that about? And actually inquiring rather than moving through it. Or ignoring it, but just overall slowing down, because I know, like, many of us who've experienced trauma, what we do is we keep moving. We're that, it's like, okay, if I keep moving, then they can't catch me. The trauma won't catch up. And we're scared of slowing down, because then we're like, oh no, then I'm going to be bombarded by the feelings and the emotions. But the truth is the emotions, the thoughts, they're there anyways. And you're not going to notice anything new. Like, so yes, you're going to face the thought that you have all day, every day, that's telling you whatever it is. But the truth is slowing down and just saying, okay, you're here. Cool. Thanks for being here. Then suddenly it's like, oh, look, I haven't thought about that for a while. So that was a huge gift. And always, if it's therapy for whatever I need to work through, coaching, again, goes back to support, but different kinds of support.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. One of the final questions I usually ask is around, what is something that you wish you knew when you were younger? But I kind of want to cater this more specifically to something that's come up repeatedly throughout your story is, what do you wish that you had known about shame?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I knew that it wasn't true, that all of these stories that I had been told were told to me by unhealthy people, and that wasn't mine to carry. I use the metaphor often. I say, like, I had this backpack of shame that I was carrying, and it was like, oh, here, give it to me, I'll toss it back there. Oh, you have your own shame? I'll take that too. I'll carry it for you also. I'm carrying enough too. And it's like, that backpack, you can put it down at any time. And so, and that's the greatest gift of knowing, like, I don't need to believe the thoughts. I can move them away. And, and it's about just testing it in little baby steps of like, okay, I think I'm going to be like, I did these big, huge, like, I'm going to post this on Facebook, my most vulnerable story, and let's test that. But we can test our shame in so many tiny ways in our lives and throughout our days. And So I think that's what I wish I had known, that I could challenge it, and that
Yeah.
challenging it would actually show me the truth.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's quotable for sure.
Thank you.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. We're going to put links to all of your amazingness in the show notes, but please tell
Great.
people where they can find you, how they can learn from you, and how they can work with you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I'm all over social media. I have a website, michelleanhangcoaching.com, and I use the same handle on every form of social media. So I'm easy to find. And please reach out if there's any way I can support you.
Awesome. Thank you again for your time and for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.